The email landed in her inbox like a sucker punch during a sunrise. Brutal, unexpected, and grotesquely out of place. It was 7:16 a.m., and Lauren Hayes had just poured coffee into her favorite chipped ceramic mug, the one that said, "Hustle harder," a relic from a corporate retreat that cost her 2 panic attacks and a flight she never made to her brother's wedding in Denver. Outside her rented cabin in Oregon, fog clung to the pines like secrets, soft and steady. She had planned to stay offline for 2 blessed weeks, her first real break in 14 years, but there it was, glowing on her phone screen. Subject line: important update regarding your role. Her thumb hovered. She knew what it meant before she opened it. She always knew. The company, Dynatech Systems, had been circling the drain for months, chopping budgets, slashing travel, whispering restructuring behind closed doors. Still, she thought she'd insulated herself. She'd saved them from a compliance meltdown last fall. She'd bailed out 2 failing client rollouts. She'd even trained her own replacement during a merger scare. She wasn't expendable, not her. And yet, when she finally tapped it open, the words cut clean. Your position has been eliminated effective immediately. Your severance has been rescinded. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. No phone call. No explanation. Just pure cowardice in corporate font. She didn't throw the mug, didn't scream, didn't even curse. She just laughed. One sharp, cracked sound that startled a blue jay off the porch railing. Then she stood barefoot on the deck, mist brushing her ankles, and thought, so this is how they do it. She had begged for this PTO. Literally begged. 8 months of 60-hour weeks, late nights that bled into early mornings, a sprained wrist she never logged because deadlines didn't care about pain. She'd pulled a forecast review from a hospital bed after collapsing at her desk. All of that, for this, erased mid-break like a typo. She took a picture of the email, not because she needed proof, HR timestamps everything, but because she wanted to remember the moment she finally stopped caring. She didn't reply, not yet. She let the silence sit there like a bruise and walked outside, let the mountain air slap her awake. The chill cleared her head faster than caffeine ever had. Dynatech thought they'd picked the perfect time, when she was offline, unreachable, out of sight. But they had no idea what she'd buried in her contract 6 months ago. They had just pulled the pin on their own grenade. Lauren went back inside, sat in the cabin's stiff leather chair, and opened her laptop. The same one she'd nearly burned out saving Dynatech's Phoenix project. The one no one else would touch because the codebase was older than half the interns. That was when she made her move. 6 months earlier, the CFO, Graham Lang, had cornered her in a glass conference room with the HR director, Nadia Pierce, and a cup of cold Starbucks. "You're the only one with the seniority to stabilize Phoenix," Graham had said, voice full of fake warmth. Translation: no one else wants the mess. Lauren had smiled, nodded, and countered. "Fine, I'll do it, but I want a contract amendment, in writing." They'd agreed instantly. They needed her to keep the acquisition optics clean. Legal had skimmed her draft, HR barely glanced. And tucked between the retention bonus and performance review clauses, she'd slid in a line of her own. Clause 14.3b, termination during approved PTO without documented cause shall constitute breach of protected employment status, triggering immediate restitution and a fixed penalty of $2,500,000 within 5 business days. It was elegant, legalese poetry. No one read it. They just signed. And now, staring at that email, Lauren felt a cold calm spread through her chest. She forwarded the termination notice and her signed contract to her attorney with a 3-word subject. "Let me know." Then she placed her phone face down and smiled for the first time all week. The forest didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Dynatech Systems had just written its own obituary and stamped her signature at the bottom. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin, dusty ribbons. Lauren sat at the cabin's small pine table, coffee cold, laptop open but untouched. She'd already done her part. The email was sent, the clause in motion. All that remained was time. 5 business days, according to her carefully worded 14.3b. Her lawyer, Jack Levin, had replied within the hour. Sit tight. They just triggered a breach. Lauren didn't need to do anything else. She didn't rant on social media, didn't send angry texts, didn't call anyone for sympathy. She simply waited, because she understood something Dynatech didn't. Contracts don't need emotions to destroy people. They just need signatures. At Dynatech's headquarters in Seattle, the gears of bureaucracy churned to life like a dying engine. It started small. A junior legal associate, still bright-eyed from law school, was reviewing HR's termination packets for audit prep when she stumbled across Lauren's file. Everything looked ordinary. The email, the timestamp, the PTO log. Until she noticed a buried subclause in the digital contract marked Retention Revision Addendum, Phoenix Project. She clicked it open. Clause 14.3b blinked on screen, simple and devastating. Her stomach dropped. She read it again, then again, making sure it wasn't a typo. It wasn't. By noon, 2 senior attorneys were huddled over her monitor, whispering like priests at a funeral. The outside counsel, Cora Richards, a corporate litigator with 20 years of damage control under her belt, leaned back and muttered, "Jesus Christ, someone actually signed this?" She forwarded the file to Dynatech's in-house legal head with a single-line email. Urgent. Clause 14.3b appears enforceable. High liability risk. An hour later, HR responded with their usual arrogance, reviewed and noted. This clause was never activated. Employee already processed. Cora picked up the phone immediately. "Let me make this simple," she said to the company's general counsel, Robert Delaney, who sounded half asleep. "You terminated an employee mid-PTO without documented cause. That clause doesn't care about intent. It doesn't care about your HR's interpretation. It's triggered. You've got 5 business days before you owe her $2.5 million. There was silence on the line, followed by a slow, defeated sigh. "I'll escalate," he said, but they didn't. Not properly. Back in the executive suite, Graham Lang, the CFO, brushed the issue aside between sips of cold brew. "Probably boilerplate fluff," he told Nadia Pierce, the HR director. "If it were real, legal would have flagged it months ago." Nadia, who wore beige like it was a personality, nodded. "Exactly. She's bluffing. It's probably leftover wording from a prior template. We'll handle it internally." They didn't even check the timestamp. They didn't read the signature line, Graham's own digital initials, glowing on the page like a curse. Meanwhile, Lauren was sitting on her porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching fog drift across the tree line. She knew exactly what was happening. Jack had already told her. They think it's nothing. They always do, until the countdown hits 0. She opened her contract again, scrolling to the line she'd written herself, the one they'd ignored because she'd hidden it between dull HR jargon. She didn't write it out of malice. She wrote it because she'd spent 14 years watching executives weaponize technicalities to ruin people's lives. This time, she'd used the same system against them. By the 3rd day, the tension inside Dynatech was boiling. The audit team found the clause again, this time during a pre-board review. It was no longer ignorable. The clause didn't just demand restitution of all severance and benefits. It mandated an immediate penalty of $2,500,000 USD, payable within 5 business days of discovery. 5 days, Cora repeated in the conference room, her tone flat. "You've got until Monday. After that, interest accrues daily, and if you miss the window, your insurer classifies it as willful breach." Gregory, the head of finance, paled. "You're kidding. I wish I was," she said. "But your CFO signed it. So did HR. This isn't a bluff. It's a bomb, and it's already ticking." Back at the cabin, Lauren flipped another page of her book. The mountains were quiet. The company was not. Friday arrived with that hollow stillness only big corporations know before a storm. At Dynatech's downtown Seattle office, the 11th floor conference room smelled of burnt coffee and fear disguised as productivity. The CEO, Gerald Tanner, straightened his tie and rehearsed smiles in the reflection of the glass wall, while the rest of the executive team shuffled in with clipboards and anxiety. They were preparing for the quarterly board prep, the kind of meeting that usually ended in self-congratulation and catered muffins. Not today. Something heavy hung in the air, an invisible tension that even the overpowered air conditioning couldn't disperse. The first 20 minutes rolled by smoothly, numbers, graphs, empty jargon. Until a junior counsel named Paul cleared his throat. His voice cracked like glass. Before we move on to workforce optimization, I need to raise an urgent compliance concern, Clause 14.3b in Lauren Hayes' contract. The name landed like a dropped plate. The CFO, Graham Lang, didn't even look up from his laptop. Handled. HR processed her termination last week. She's gone. Paul didn't sit down. His hands were trembling, but his tone was steady now. The clause defines termination during approved PTO without documented cause as a breach of protected status. It automatically enforces restitution and a $2.5 million penalty. For 3 seconds, the room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Then Nadia from HR let out a half laugh. That's ridiculous. We reviewed the file. She added that clause herself. It's boilerplate nonsense. Paul swallowed. No, ma'am. It's not boilerplate. It's custom language, signed and timestamped by both of you. It's enforceable. Gerald looked up, finally noticing the shift. So, what? You're saying we owe this woman millions for getting fired? Yes, Paul said quietly. And technically, the countdown already started the moment that termination email was sent. CFO Graham rubbed his temple, the color draining from his face. For God's sake, it's just a drafting oversight. She can't actually collect. Across the table, the company's external counsel, Cora Richards, leaned forward, voice calm but cutting. Actually, she can. It's legally binding. I warned your in-house team on Wednesday. You ignored it. She flipped a printed copy of the contract onto the table. 5 business days. You're on day 3. The HR director's beige blazer suddenly looked more like camouflage than authority. If she wanted to make a scene, she'd have called by now, Nadia insisted. Cora shook her head. You still don't get it. She doesn't have to call. The clause triggered automatically. Every minute you waste arguing about intent compounds your exposure. Gerald tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out brittle. You're telling me one mid-level manager managed to booby-trap her own contract and we all signed it? Cora didn't blink. Yes, and that mid-level manager just outplayed your entire executive branch. The slide deck froze on the big screen, mid-sentence. Q3. Savings. Workforce Rebalancing Initiative. Below it, the bullet point that had started it all. Legacy role eliminated. Associated costs reallocated. Gerald stared at it like it had turned radioactive. Back at the cabin, Lauren was reading an old paperback on the porch, phone face down beside her. Jack's messages came in bursts throughout the day. Screenshots of internal chatter, whispers from a nervous paralegal inside Dynatech's legal team. They think it's a bluff, one message said. They're rehearsing talking points for the board meeting tomorrow. Lauren smiled faintly. She could almost hear them spinning words like optimization, leaner, agile realignment, all the euphemisms for cruelty. She'd spent over a decade translating that language into survival. Now it was their turn to choke on it. She took a slow sip of bourbon-laced coffee and whispered to herself, "Let them rehearse. The real show starts Monday." Somewhere downtown, Paul sat alone at his desk, staring at the clause he'd unearthed. 5 business days, 3 down, 2 to go. and every clock in Dynatech ticked like a fuse. Monday morning, 8:59 a.m. The boardroom at Dynatech Systems looked like a courtroom dressed for a gala. Brushed steel, smoked glass, and a table long enough to host a Senate hearing. Steam curled from untouched coffee mugs, the air tight with overcompensated confidence. By 9:01, that illusion would break. CEO Gerald Tanner straightened his cufflinks as board members filtered in, shaking hands and trading pleasantries. Across from him, CFO Graham Lang checked his watch, pretending his pulse wasn't spiking. Nadia Pierce, HR director turned amateur executioner, arranged her notes with surgical neatness. They thought today was about quarterly optics, cost-saving highlights, and smooth investor reassurance. The meeting began like every other. Graphs, projections, buzzwords, synergy, rebalancing, strategic agility. But then, as the presentation reached workforce optimization, Maria Lind, the lead investor from North Point Capital, raised her hand without looking up from her leather-bound notes. "Before we proceed," she said, voice even but razor-sharp, "I'd like clarification on this line item." She tapped her pen against the slide showing cost savings, removal of legacy role, Lauren Hayes. CFO Graham gave his trademark rehearsed chuckle. "Yes, standard reallocation from the Phoenix project sunsetting. Position was redundant, resources rebalanced efficiently." "Stop," Maria said. "Explain the clause attached to her termination." The air shifted. You could almost hear a pin drop. Robert Delaney, the company's general counsel, froze mid-page. He'd been given Lauren's file that morning by a trembling junior associate. He knew what was coming. "Clause 14.3b, Maria said, enunciating each number like a countdown. "It's mentioned in this pre-litigation summary from your external counsel." Gerald blinked. "Pre-litigation what?" Robert exhaled slowly. "It appears Ms. Hayes inserted a termination condition in her contract revision during the Phoenix integration period. It stipulates a $2.5 million penalty for termination during approved PTO without documented cause." Silence slammed the room. Maria leaned back, eyes locked on the CEO. "So, in an effort to save costs, your HR department triggered a multi-million-dollar liability?" Nadia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Graham tried to interject. "It's probably unenforceable. Legal fluff. We've—" Robert cut him off, voice dead calm. "It's signed, digitally verified. Your initials are on the execution page, Graham. HR's too." The CFO went pale. "That's impossible." "It's not," Robert said. "It's binding. We've got 3 days left before payment is legally overdue." Maria's expression hardened. And was this disclosed to the board during severance reallocations? Graham stammered. "It wasn't material at the time." "Material?" she snapped. "You reallocated her severance to fund retention bonuses for other departments and called it fiscal hygiene. You've exposed us to litigation that will dwarf your so-called savings." The head of audit whispered, "If that clause holds, we'll breach coverage. The insurer will call it self-inflicted." CFO. Graham's mouth moved, but nothing coherent came out. Across the table, Cora Richards, the external counsel, folded her hands and said evenly, "Let's not delude ourselves. The clause is enforceable. There's precedent for it. You signed a timed penalty mechanism. She doesn't even have to sue. The breach activates automatically once discovered." Nadia finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "She never said anything. She didn't even respond to the termination email." Cora looked at her. "That's the point. She didn't need to." Gerald's face was drained of color. "Can't we settle quietly?" Cora shook her head, already in motion. A pre-litigation packet was filed this morning. 3 business days to pay or face compound penalties. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hiss of the espresso machine and the tick of the wall clock. Then, right on cue, a courier knocked on the door. A man in a navy coat entered, carrying a single manila envelope. He didn't make eye contact, just placed it on the table in front of Gerald and said, "Delivery for the board. From Levin and Pierce, attorneys at law." He walked out before anyone could breathe. The room stared at the envelope. Gerald didn't touch it. Maria finally broke the silence. "Open it." He did. His hands shook. Inside was a single-page notice stamped in red. Notification of breach. Clause 14.3b. Payment due 72 hours. And underneath, a signature. Jack Levin, attorney for Lauren Hayes. The sound of the paper hitting the table was louder than it should have been. A single sheet, yet it landed like a verdict. Gerald Tanner just stared at it. The red stamp, the clean lettering, the unmistakable name at the bottom. Levin and Pierce, attorneys at law. For a man who built his reputation on controlling rooms like this, he suddenly looked like someone trapped inside one. "What the hell is this?" he asked, even though everyone already knew. CFO Graham Lang leaned forward, scanning the notice. His eyes caught the words, "Payment due, 72 hours." He blinked twice, muttering, "There has to be a mistake. That clause can't be real." Cora Richards, calm as ever, folded her hands. "It's real and enforceable. You signed it." The clock started the moment HR sent that termination email. That means you have 3 business days left to transfer $2.5 million, or the penalty compounds and triggers a secondary breach. Nadia Pierce, who'd spent all morning trying to hold her composure, looked like she might pass out. "This isn't possible. She wasn't even high-level management. It's absurd." Cora's tone didn't change. "She drafted the amendment while you were desperate to unload the Phoenix team. Legal oversight was light. The senior counsel was out sick. You rubber-stamped her version. You didn't read." Maria Lind, the investor from North Point, spoke next, the kind of voice that made people sweat more than shout. "So, to summarize, you terminated a protected employee mid-vacation, violated a clause none of you read, reallocated her severance, and now owe her more than you saved this quarter." No one answered. Robert Delaney, the general counsel, ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Insurance won't cover it," he said finally. "It's internal negligence. They'll classify it as self-inflicted breach." Maria's gaze snapped toward him. "You mean to tell me the retention fund, the same one you bragged about optimizing, is about to get drained by your HR department's incompetence?" Nadia flinched like she'd been slapped. "We were following directives," Graham said. Graham slammed a hand on the table. "Don't pin this on me! You signed it!" Cora shot back, voice rising for the first time. "Your digital signature is time-stamped. You approved the termination. You ignored counsel warnings. You own this." For a long moment, the room was chaos. Voices overlapping, chairs scraping, the illusion of leadership collapsing under fluorescent light. Then, from the far end of the table, Maria stood. Everyone went silent. Her words came out cold and clear. "This company is about to face an internal audit, a breach notification, and a liquidity hole. You've turned a cost-saving exercise into a liability event. If you don't pay by the deadline, I'll recommend the board freeze executive bonuses and open an external investigation into governance failures." Gerald swallowed hard. "We can fix this," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "We'll reach out to her directly. Make her an offer." Cora shook her head. "You won't reach her. She's represented by Levin. Once that notice was served, direct contact violates pre-litigation protocol." Graham's voice cracked. "So we just pay her?" "Yes," Cora said. "You pay her. Quietly. Completely. Because if this goes to court, it's public record. And the moment it's public, your investors will see a headline about a wrongful termination costing millions mid-PTO. You'll be lucky if the stock drops only 10%. Silence again. Someone's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. Gerald leaned back, eyes glazed. staring at the clause printed on the notice like it was written in another language. Across town, in her cabin, Lauren Hayes flipped pancakes on a cast-iron skillet. Her phone buzzed once. A short text from Jack. Delivered. They read it. She didn't reply. She poured syrup over her plate, sat by the window, and watched morning sunlight drift through the trees. She didn't need to gloat. The contract was doing that for her. By Tuesday morning, panic had metastasized. The quiet hum of Dynatech Systems' 11th floor had turned into a low, constant buzz. Footsteps too fast, whispers too sharp. A rumor had leaked. Something about a clause, a lawsuit, millions on the line. No one had details, but everyone knew it was bad. The executive suite, usually sealed off like a glass fortress, was now a revolving door of lawyers, finance analysts, and red-faced managers pretending not to be terrified. Inside the main conference room, CFO Graham Lang was on his 4th espresso and 2nd tie of the day. Sweat had already claimed the first one. "We need options," he barked. "Loans, deferrals, fund reallocations, anything. We can't just wire $2.5 million to some mid-tier strategist without board approval." Cora Richards, cool as an iceberg, didn't look up from her laptop. "You don't have options. The clause is a self-executing penalty. You pay, or you breach again. Delay means additional damages and nullified insurance coverage." "Insurance should cover it," Graham snapped. Robert Delaney, the general counsel, didn't even lift his eyes. "No, it won't. Read the fine print. It's categorized as intentional contractual breach." "That's on you." Across the table, HR Director Nadia Pierce looked like she hadn't slept since Friday. "Couldn't we argue she manipulated the contract? That she deceived us?" Cora finally looked up, her stare flat and merciless. "You can't claim deception when you signed it. You had every chance to read it, and she didn't hide it. It's right there, sandwiched between retention bonus clauses you were all too excited to approve." Graham exhaled hard through his nose. "We can't just hand her a payday. It'll set a precedent. Everyone will start combing through old contracts looking for landmines. Then maybe next time," Cora said, "you'll read before you sign." The silence that followed was nuclear. Meanwhile, the ripple had reached the investors. Maria Lind was on a call with her fund's partners, her voice clipped and surgical. "Yes, the breach is real. Yes, the clause is enforceable. And yes, it was signed by executive leadership. Our next step is damage control and executive accountability." She didn't say who would fall first, but everyone knew it would be Gerald. The CEO himself sat in his office, blinds half drawn, staring at an untouched latte. His reflection looked older in the glass, or maybe just smaller. He picked up his phone twice to call Lauren, then put it down again. What would he even say? "Sorry we fired you illegally during your first vacation in 14 years? Hope you'll waive the clause you wrote yourself?" No, there was nothing to say. She'd outplayed him. At 2:07 p.m., an email from Levin and Pierce arrived in legal's inbox. The subject line was polite and terrifying. Payment reminder. Clause 14.3b. Enforcement window. 48 hours remaining. Attached were wire transfer instructions and a pre-drafted acknowledgement form. Cora forwarded it to the room. "Clock's ticking," she said. Graham slammed his palm on the table. "She's bleeding us dry for nothing." "No," Cora said. "She's collecting exactly what you agreed to pay her if you broke your word." Robert spoke softly, almost to himself. "And we broke it in writing." No one replied. The weight of that truth sat heavy in the air. By evening, half the company had heard whispers of the vacation firing. EIT staff joked nervously about checking their contracts. Someone printed Clause 14.3b in Comic Sans and taped it to the break room fridge. By sunset, HR had taken it down. In her cabin, Lauren Hayes was sitting by the fireplace, a notebook on her lap. The cover was embossed with her initials. Inside were ideas for a consulting firm. Her own. Compliance with teeth, she wrote at the top of the page. She smirked, taking a slow sip of wine as her phone buzzed again. Jack had sent another text. Insurance just folded. They'll have to pay it out directly. You should see the panic emails. Lauren smiled faintly, jotting another note. Never fight fire. Just let their paper burn. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the pines like applause. Wednesday dawned gray over Seattle, the kind of morning that felt like judgment. The building's glass facade reflected a sky that looked ready to rain lawsuits. Inside Dynatech Systems, the executive suite was a battlefield of silence. No one said good morning anymore. No one met anyone's eyes. The only sound was the echo of heels on marble and the faint hum of printers churning out damage reports. At 9:12 a.m., the company's treasury team wired $2,500,000 USD to Levin and Pierce, client trust account. No speeches, no ceremony. Just a sterile email confirmation and a digital signature from CFO Graham Lang, whose hands shook so violently he misspelled his own name on the acknowledgement form. The moment it was done, Cora Richards stood, closed her laptop, and said flatly, "Payment acknowledged. Breach resolved. But make no mistake, you just confessed your incompetence in writing." She didn't wait for a reply. She packed her files, nodded to Robert Delaney, and walked out. Across the room, HR Director Nadia Pierce sat frozen. Her lipstick had faded, her posture wilted. "This will ruin us," she whispered. Maria Lind didn't look up from her notes. "No, it will ruin you." She rose gracefully, smoothing the lapel of her charcoal suit. "I'll be convening an emergency investor review. Expect executive suspensions before the week is out." Then she turned to Gerald. "Starting with you." Gerald Tanner, the man who once believed charm could outmaneuver reality, just sat there, slack-jawed. "You can't—" "I can," Maria interrupted. "And I will. You fired the one person who understood this company's bones. Now you'll answer for it." She pushed in her chair, left the room, and didn't look back. When the door clicked shut, it was like the air was sucked out. Graham muttered something about resigning before the news hit the wires. Nadia quietly removed her ID badge, setting it on the table beside the empty coffee cup Gerald had been too numb to drink. The dark stain on the wood where he'd spilled last time was still faintly visible. A ghost of arrogance passed. By noon, the story had already leaked. An anonymous post on an industry forum. Dynatech pays 2.5 million penalty after firing employee mid-vacation. It spread like wildfire across LinkedIn, whispered in Slack channels, dissected by compliance nerds who secretly cheered. No one mentioned Lauren by name, but every reader knew the type of person she was. The quiet one who kept everything running. The one they never listened to until it was too late. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Lauren Hayes stood on the porch of her Oregon cabin, barefoot, a mug of coffee steaming in her hand. The forest smelled like rain and pine and peace. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Jack Levin. Funds received. They paid in full. No pushback. She stared at the text for a long moment before setting the phone down. No champagne, no victory shout. Just a quiet breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since the day that email arrived. 14 years of overnights, skipped birthdays, ER wristbands, and endless circling back had finally balanced out in one clean line of legalese. She poured another cup of coffee, turned on some music, and flipped a pancake in the skillet. The rhythm was slow, deliberate. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even vindictive. What she felt was something rarer, peace mixed with poetic satisfaction. On her kitchen table sat a leather folder labeled Haven Strategies, LLC. Inside were early notes for her new consultancy, one that would specialize in compliance audits and employee protection contracts. Teaching people how to write their own armor, she'd joked to Jack. He'd replied, "You already did." The phone buzzed one last time that morning. It was an email notification, subject line: Acknowledgement of settlement, Dynatech Systems. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Outside, the rain began to fall. Soft, steady, cleansing. The trees swayed like they were exhaling with her. Lauren leaned back against the porch railing, watching droplets chase each other down the railing, and whispered to the empty air. They fired me on vacation, and now I'm finally free. She smiled once, slow and quiet, as thunder rolled far away. Not angry, just final. Back in Seattle, the janitor would later mop up that old coffee stain in the boardroom and wonder why everyone looked haunted. But Lauren never saw it. She never looked back. The claws had spoken for her, louder than she ever needed to.